Awesome. Well, welcome again, all of you here at the factory and at the fire hall and at the warehouse and in Churchill and everyone watching online. Now, we have a special privilege for this last week of Unstoppable. We are welcoming a dear friend of ours, Tim Fletcher, to speak. Tim is the founder and director of Finding Freedom, an addictions recovery program that we have been partnering with since May. And he is a dear friend of us. Yeah, we can give it up for Tim and for Finding Freedom. Yeah. He's a dear friend of ours, and he's also part of our church. And so would you all join me here and everywhere, giving Tim a warm Riverwood welcome.
Thank you, Zach, and it's my privilege to be part of Riverwood and to be part of what God is doing here. We're doing this series, Unstoppable, and it's basically the premise we started with is there's a target on our back. There are forces around us that want to see us destroyed, that want us to be prevented from being an impact for God in this world, for becoming healthy. Some of those forces are within ourselves. We have a dark side. Some of those forces are within our culture, and some of those forces are within the spiritual world around us. And so what Paul does in Ephesians 6 is he gives us armor. He gives us a set of attitudes that we need in order to be victorious in this battle that we face. And today, for the final in the series of Unstoppable, I'll be doing the shield of faith. But let me just read again the passage for you. Paul says, and that about wraps it up. God is strong and he wants you strong. So take everything the master has set out for you, well-made weapons of the best materials, and put them to use so you'll be able to stand up against everything the devil throws your way. This is no afternoon athletic contest that we'll walk away from and forget about in a couple hours. This is for keeps. A life and death fight to the finish against the devil and all his angels. Be prepared. You're up against far more than you can handle on your own. Take all the help you can get, every weapon God has issued, so that when it's all over but the shouting, you'll still be on your feet. Truth, righteousness, peace, faith, and salvation are more than words. Learn how to apply them. Now, to help you understand the shield of faith, I want you to imagine this soldier getting ready for battle, and he puts on all of the other armor that we've talked about so far, and he heads out against this massive army all by himself. He's not going to win that war. And so what a soldier realizes, I need to put my armor on, but I need extra resources here. I need extra help. But I don't just need any resource. I need qualified resources that I can trust. And so if I'm going to be victorious in this battle, yes, I got to wear armor, but I got to have faith in the resources provided, because I can't do this alone. And that's what Paul is saying. And that's what we need to understand this morning. We can't do it alone. Now just think about this resources thing a little bit further. That soldier might have gone with his armor into that battle all cocky, thinking he could make it. But once he realized he didn't have enough resources to take on that powerful army, he would have gone from cockiness to shaking in his boots. Lack of resources always results in fear. And so if you don't have resources, you live in fear. But if you have resources, you live in peace. And so what the soldier needs is resources and faith in those resources, which will give victory and faith, or in peace, as he faces the enemies around us. Think of it in terms of a young boy that goes to school and he's bullied. Every day he's bullied by the same bully. He goes home at night. He's depressed. He hates going to school. Every morning as he thinks of going to school, he's full of anxiety, wondering what the bully's going to do to him today. And it's just a miserable experience because he doesn't have resources to handle the bully. And then one day he gets a light bulb. He has a brother who's an NFL player. He's 300 pounds, 6'6", solid muscle. And he goes to his brother one day and he says, would you go with me to school today? because there's a bully that I need you to take care of. So his brother goes with him to school, and he says, point out the bully. And so the young kid proudly walks down the hall outside of the smoking area where bullies tend to hang out, and he says to his brother, that's him. And his brother picks him up with one hand. He says, if you ever mess with my brother again, you got to deal with me. Realize from that day on, that kid ruled that school. He didn't have any fear going to school anymore. He had total peace. Why? Because he had resources. He had resources that he could depend on. Now, what happens with a kid, though, that grows up and he doesn't have resources? He faces a big, bad, scary world with no help. Mom and dad aren't there for them. And he is all by himself, feeling abandoned. That child lives in constant fear. And what we've been talking about when I did the series here is that we call that complex trauma. A child who lives in a world without the resources to handle it and therefore lives in fear all the time, that is a terrible existence. And so a child who lives in fear lives with anxiety. They go to bed every night and their mind races and spins, obsessive thinking, not finding a solution to all of their problems. And so they are afraid of anything that changes because they might get hurt. They're afraid of anything unknown. They're afraid of success. They're afraid of failure. They're full of fear. But what they've learned is that the very people you should trust as resources have let them down. And so they come up with, not only don't I have resources, they reach another conclusion: don't trust anybody. Because if you trust, you're going to get hurt, because you will get let down. And so therefore, what does that child do as it gets older? In order to get its needs met, in order to not get hurt, trust yourself and become a master manipulator. Become a control freak where you control everybody. Because if you can control everybody and you can manipulate everybody, then your needs will get met and you'll never get hurt. And they go into life thinking that that will work. But what always happens is they come across enemies bigger than they can control and bigger than they can manipulate, and they always end up getting hurt. But if I was to go to those people and say, take the shield of faith, trust God, they go, not a chance. I don't trust anybody. Because trusting means getting hurt. And what I want you to understand is this. It's easy to talk about this shield of faith, but for people who've lived in fear, taking the shield of faith is one of the scariest things to do, because they have trained themselves never to trust. And so it is a huge obstacle, a huge risk, a huge challenge for them to become equipped by trusting God. Let me get you to think about this faith thing a little bit further. The Bible in James 2 talks about 3 different types of faith, and I think you'll quickly identify with them. The first would be what we call an intellectual faith. You believe that there's a God. You believe that Jesus came and he died. It's all in your head. And then for some, that intellectual faith, those facts, begin to affect their emotions. So they have an emotional faith where they feel a sense of awe or a sense of fear. And what James wants us to understand is that that faith is important, but it's not enough, because even Satan has that kind of faith. He believes there's a God, and when he thinks about God, he shakes, he shudders, he's full of fear. And so what James wants us to understand is there's a third type of faith, which is the key piece that we have to understand. And I think it's what Paul's talking about. And theologians call it volitional faith, or the faith of choice to surrender and depend entirely on. Let me give you an illustration. Many years ago, there was a tightrope walker, and his name was Blondin, and he did circuses all over the U.S. and Canada and around the world. And one day, he set up a tightrope line across Niagara Falls. And he got up on the line and he started to walk across Niagara Falls and back. And pretty soon you can imagine this huge crowd begins to gather. And then after he did that for a while, he went and he got a wheelbarrow and he pushed his wheelbarrow across the tightrope and back several times. And then he got off the tightrope to this massive crowd. And he says, how many of you believe I could put a person in the wheelbarrow and push them across? And they all said, yeah, we believe you're the great blonde and we've been watching you. And then he turned to a person and he says, hop in. You realize that that just went from head to heart, and that's scary? That went from intellect to a choice to totally depend on. Total surrender. And that's what Paul is talking about. So when we face a battle, we don't just march out there ourselves. When we face the enemy, we run to our commander and say, tell me what to do. I'm trusting you. Fight for me and I'll fight with you, but I need you. And that's how we face the enemy. Now, I love it in the Bible that this whole concept of faith, fear, resources is put together into a beautiful illustration. And most of you are familiar with it. And it is Psalm 23, one of the most well-known passages in the Bible. And it's written by King David, who at one time in his life was a shepherd boy, and he took care of sheep. And he reached a point late in his life where after being king over Israel, that he looked back over his life and he said, I've been ruling people and I've led sheep. People and sheep are a lot alike. And the reality about sheep is two things. And you'll never understand Psalm 23 unless you see it through these lenses. The first is you got to understand the nature of sheep, what they're like. And secondly, you need to understand that sheep, basically their most dominant emotion is fear. And the biggest challenge for sheep is to trust a shepherd. And so what David is saying late in his life is this. We have to trust somebody. We can trust ourselves. And we can think we're smarter and we can handle life, but we're going to get hurt and messed up. Or we can find somebody to trust who's got greater resources. And David says, I've been looking for a shepherd all my life, and I found the perfect shepherd, God. And he begins to outline what it's like in order to have God as your shepherd. So the bottom line about sheep is this. Sheep cannot survive. They're the only animal in the world that cannot survive on its own. They will die if left alone. They need a shepherd. And let me give you some facts about sheep to help you understand that. If you've looked at that picture of a sheep, you realize very quickly that they cannot defend themselves from an enemy. Sheep have hooves, they don't have claws, they don't have sharp teeth or fangs. They're not fast, they got this great big wool coat around them, and they can hardly run. And so if an enemy attacks, they're useless. And so they just have a big defense problem. Because of that, they have fear as that main emotion. Do you realize that a sheep will not eat or lie down and relax if it feels any type of fear? And so if it senses that a couple of the males are butting heads and there's tension in the flock, it gets all uptight. And it can't eat or lie down. Conflict. It just makes it full of fear. And then if they see a predator at all, then they get all uptight and they can't eat or lie down. And then if the shepherd leads them to a brand new pasture where they've never been before, new territory, they're all nervous and they can't eat or lie down. And if they're in a circumstance where they can't see the shepherd, they panic and they can't eat or lie down. Fear dominates them. But what makes it worse is sheep don't trust very easily. Well, they do trust, and it's in a weird way, okay? So I got to give it to you this way. We're like sheep. You see that? We got this trauma stuff. We got this fear. And for people from trauma, fear is the dominant emotion. We don't trust very well either. But sheep think they're smarter than everybody when they're really dumb. And they're kind of like us that way. So here's what will happen if you left a sheep alone. They wouldn't think, I need to just graze the grass and then go to a different field and find new grass. They would graze all the grass and then they'd eat up the roots. And so pretty soon there'd be no chance for that field to replenish grass because they would eat everything up. And then they would see water, and if it had oil or gas on it, all of a sudden it's pretty water. It's purple and it glistens. And they go, I want that water. It looks good. And then if they saw a poisonous plant, they go, it's got a flower on it. I like flowers. I'll eat poisonous plants. They have no way of discerning what is good for them or bad for them. They go by what makes them feel good in the moment. Sound familiar? And then they don't like following a shepherd, but they'll follow the mob. So if there's this big ego-type sheep that kind of pushes his weight around, and everybody who's kind of feeling inferior and insecure starts following that big sheep, if he runs off a cliff, they'll run off a cliff with him. Because they're just following the leader. Ask them to follow a shepherd, and they go, no, he's stupid, but this guy's smart. That is sheep. And sheep always think the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. And so they don't like a shepherd that puts a fence there because that's rules. And they think the shepherd's trying to take my fun away. He's trying to keep me from the good stuff because they don't trust the shepherd. And so that is the challenge that we have, just like sheep. So David says, let me tell you then about this shepherd so that hopefully you can begin to trust your resources. And then you will have this shield of faith. So he begins with, how good is this shepherd when it comes to my physical needs? Food and water. And it says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. Now, David was writing in a jungle area, or in a desert area, not a jungle. He was dry, barren area. And so to lie down in green pastures says two things. That there's green grass would tell us that this is a shepherd who does his homework on where there's grass. And so he wants the best for his sheep, and he's willing to put in the work to provide the best for his sheep. And then the fact that they lie down says that they are relaxed. They feel safe. So he provides that physical sense of safety and security. And then it says, leads me beside quiet or still waters. Sheep have so much fear that they will not drink from a stream that is moving. Because if they see moving water, it freaks them out. And so if a shepherd's in an area where there's not a pond or a well, there's just a stream that's running, sheep won't drink. So what a shepherd does, because he knows his sheep, he gets them, he knows their struggles, their weaknesses, their fears, he will take some big rocks and put them in the middle of the stream. And he'll create a little dam. And all of a sudden you got a pool of water beginning to form because of the dam. And so he provides still waters for his sheep. Now that's a good shepherd. That's a shepherd who knows his sheep and he loves his sheep and he works for their best. And then it says that he guides me in the right path. But then it adds to that, even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. What is interesting is that follows, he guides me. Now, if the sheep are out on a mountain range and it's a beautiful sunny day and everything's nice, they go, I got a great shepherd. He guides me beautifully. But then when they start down this valley that's dark and scary, they go, I got a dumb shepherd. He doesn't know how to guide at all. And so what David said is, even when life is going smoothly, yes, he's a good guide. But when life goes into dark valleys, he's still a good guide. And that is the important thing. Let me back up just one little bit here. He says, he restores my soul. This to me is so significant and I love it. The shepherd meets their physical needs, food, water. This, he restores my soul. He meets their emotional needs. When a sheep, because of its big wool coat, if it lies down, sometimes it flops over on its back. There's a bit of an incline that it's lying on, and it just goes on its back. Or there's a bit of a rut. And if a sheep goes on its back and it's got lots of wool, it can't get back on its feet. And the technical term that shepherds use is that that sheep is cast down. And it doesn't just mean that it's fallen down upside down. What it means is also is that they are cast down emotionally and they feel hopeless. And what we know is that if sheep get like that, with their feet up in the air and they can't get back on their feet, within half an hour, they will feel so hopeless they will die. And so David picks that up as a shepherd in Psalm 42 and chapter 43. He says this, "Why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you hopeless and discouraged within?" What David is saying is sheep have these emotions of hopelessness that they slide into, and we're the same. And we get to a place where we start to give up because it all looks hopeless. And what does David say in Psalm 23? When a shepherd sees the sheep cast down, he's attentive to them. He restores them. Now, he doesn't just put them on their feet. He says he restores their soul. He brings them out of hopelessness back to a place of hope. Somebody has said to me a number of times over the last few months, the church has done a great job of helping people spiritually and physically, but not quite as good helping people emotionally. And I spend all of my life working with people who are cast down. And I wouldn't do what I do unless I knew God restored souls. Unless God took cast down people, that was his commitment, to bring them back to a place of hope. I wouldn't do what I do if I didn't know he was doing it with me. Because that is something that is so overwhelming for people. Now let me take you back to that valley. So the shepherd, he meets the physical needs. He's meeting the cast down emotional need. But there's another need that comes in the valley. So when a sheep goes into a valley, they don't like it because it's dark. But why does a shepherd take sheep into valleys? To this dark, difficult, scary, hard place? Two reasons, really. In the beginning of the year, the shepherds would go up onto the mountain ranges because with the fresh thaw of snow, there was fresh grass. And as that got eaten, then they would want to go to another mountain area. So to get to one mountaintop to another, you got to go through a valley. And then the second reason is, as the summer goes on, all the mountaintops get grazed. They go a bit lower, that gets grazed. They go a bit lower, that gets grazed. And then it starts drying out, and it doesn't replenish. But water flows downhill. Water always goes to the lowest point, which is a valley. So where can a shepherd always be sure he'll find grass? In the darkest valley, in the deepest valley. And here's what I want you to see. That sheep goes into that valley, and all of a sudden they're scared, they're confused. They go, "What's going on, God? We thought you cared for us. Why are you bringing to this scary place?" And because it's dark, they can't see the shepherd. And so we're told the shepherd has a rod and a staff. The rod's like a little billy club that was used for defense against wild animals. It was used for discipline. But then there's that staff, that long staff with a crook in the top. And what happens in a dark valley? If the shepherd sees one sheep that's a little more fearful than the other, that's really just struggling, he'll take his long staff and he'll hold it so that the bottom of that staff touches that little sheep on the side. And what the sheep realizes is, I can't see the shepherd, but I can feel him. Even though it feels like he's abandoned me because I can't see him, I know he's still there. And so we have a shepherd who is so aware of our fear that he comforts us when we can't see him. But take that further. If sheep always lived on mountaintops, they'd die because the grass would run out. And then if they tried to stay there in the hot summer months, they would become burned out. They would become tired, overwhelmed, stressed out. And so what does a shepherd do when sheep start getting stressed out and tired? he takes them to a valley. And it's in a valley that he restores their soul. So he doesn't just restore souls when they're cast down. He restores souls that are burned out. But to do that, he doesn't take you to a mountaintop. He often takes you to a valley to restore your soul. He knows what you need and where water and grass can be found. Then the next thing this shepherd does says he prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And what that means is that the shepherd, when they went to a new pasture, that was the table, and he's preparing the meal for his sheep. So he would go ahead of the sheep, and he would check for snakes. He would check for poisonous plants, any other predators. He would check for gopher holes that a sheep might step in and break its leg. And he would get all of that taken care of, and then the table's prepared, and then he says to the sheep, come on in and eat, because he's prepared that for them. And then it says, he anoints my head with oil. I love this as well. Out in that desert area, every night, the shepherd would have to provide a secure place for the sheep because he couldn't keep watch over them 24/7. Not like our God who can keep watch over us 24/7. So he would build what was called a fold. And he would make basically a square structure out of rocks, high enough that predators couldn't get over that wall. And then he'd leave a narrow door that the sheep would come through. And in John 10, Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd. But before he says that, he says, I am the door of the sheep. And what he meant by that is this. Once all the sheep were in the fold, and it was time to go to sleep, the shepherd would lie down over the door. And that meant that no enemy, no predator could get to the sheep unless they went through him. And they would wake him up. He was the protector of the sheep. But as the sheep are coming in each night, single file to get into the fold, the shepherd would undertake a procedure, a routine that he did every night with the sheep. He would take each sheep and put his hands around its head, and he began to study its head. And I'm sure he talked to the sheep. And he said, how was your day, Sally? Did you meet a boyfriend today? How did it go? And he'd get to know the sheep. He'd have intimate contact with the sheep. But he was looking for something. Sheep are very susceptible to a parasite that gets behind their ears and into their skull. And if it gets there, it'll drive them crazy and they'll die. And so what a shepherd will do is he's looking for that parasite. And if he sees it, he takes oil and he anoints them with oil, and that kills the parasite. And guess what he's doing? One-on-one contact. One-on-one building intimacy. One-on-one getting to know the sheep's personality. One-on-one attention to each sheep. And so this is not just a shepherd of a million flock. This is a shepherd that knows each sheep by name. This is a shepherd that knows each sheep personality. This is a shepherd that gets his sheep and loves his sheep. And he's willing to do anything. Now I want to give you a couple final points. If you go through Psalm 23, and if you've learned this as a child, let me just go through it very quickly with you. It says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. So what I want you to hear is, he makes me lie down. Third person. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Did you notice when the shepherd went from being a he to a you? In a valley. Isn't it interesting that as long as our life is good, we go, God, yeah, you're good. We like you. We're going to keep you as a he. You're kind of like our little repairman. We'll call you if we got a crisis. But when you go into a valley and it's scary, you get to know your shepherd. And all of a sudden, he's not just some foreign person that you don't really know very well. He becomes somebody that you fall in love with, that you get to know, and he is now your you. Now, let me take that a little bit further. What I want you to understand is that in the valley, you see that the sheep have a spiritual need. They need somebody outside of their species to take care of them. They need an intimate connection with somebody outside of their species, just like we do. We need a shepherd who's not like us, who's greater than us. We need a spiritual connection. So we have a shepherd who takes care of us physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Now, there's always a few sheep that don't ever get to trusting their shepherd naturally. They still think they're smarter than everybody, and so they are the little rebel sheep. What does a shepherd do to help a little rebel sheep learn that he can be trusted? That they can have him as their shield, the shield of faith. Well, he can't just say, come, follow me, follow me. What he will do is he'll take a sheep and break its leg. Now that sounds cruel, but it's actually love. Because what he does next is what's the love part. He then mends that and puts a splint on it. And then he carries that sheep on his shoulders while the leg heals for the next 4 weeks. And guess if sheep could talk, I'm sure this first week would go like this. The shepherd starts to lead the other sheep and he turns to the left and that sheep's yapping in his ear saying, dumb idea, should go to the right. And then after week 2, he's going, you know what, this shepherd's pretty smart. And all day long, he's hearing the shepherd chat to him and talk to the other sheep. He's watching how carefully he cares for the sheep. And he's getting to know his shepherd and his shepherd's heart. And so guess what happened after the 4 weeks when he took the splint off? That sheep followed the shepherd more closely than any other sheep because he got to know the shepherd's heart. And you want to know what I've realized? A lot of us aren't going to trust God on our own because we've been raised, don't trust anybody. And we rebel, and God tries to say, I'm a perfect shepherd. I love you. I know you. I have all the resources to provide for you. And we go, nope. And some of us, he's got to break a leg. And he brings us to a point of pain and weakness, a point of brokenness where we have no resources at all even to walk. And he says, would you let me carry you for a while? And while he carries us, hopefully, we get to know this shepherd. And then when we are past the crisis, we say, I surrender. So let me tie all of this together. We are like sheep. We can't survive on our own. We need a shepherd. But we don't just need a shepherd, we need to trust a shepherd. So what happens when a sheep sees a lion in the distance? He doesn't get his armor on and go run after the lion and says, come on, I'm ready for you. He gets his armor on and goes running to the shepherd. He says, there's a lion over there. I need you. I need your resources and your wisdom. Tell me what to do. I surrender. And that's the shield of faith. So if you're here today, and that trust thing is really difficult for you, I just pray that you would have got a glimpse of this beautiful shepherd and that you'd be able to surrender and trust him at a level you've never been able to do before. Let's pray. Father, first of all, thank you that you are a perfect shepherd. You've never once failed. And second, help us to trust you more. We all need to grow in faith. But for some who are in a place of pain or in a valley where their leg's been broken or they're just burned out or they're cast down, that you would just be very real to them this morning and help them to trust you. Amen.